Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. I hope you're all well. We know this session, by the fadl and the karam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is on the eve of the blessed month. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to just enter the door of Ramadan and accept our a'mal in it. So many of you have messaged about, not able to attend or halfway through you have to leave. Please, there's no reason to just excuse yourself whenever you need to. We know it's going to be a busy time from now until through the blessed month. So inshallah, we will try, unless otherwise, to continue our sessions in the time throughout the month, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, just to keep the stability. Obviously, we'll see how it goes. We'll play it, week by week. But I hope you're all well and able to sort of catch up on some reading or some materials. But other than that, let's just get through today's session. Hopefully you should be able to see the screen. And what we hope...
Have you started presenting? Because nothing's up yet.
Oh, okay, let me just see. Right. So let's have a look. You should be able to see it. Let me see. Can you see it now?
It takes a couple of seconds to come up. No, nothing yet.
Hang on. Let me share your entire screen. Wait, you did this last time. Hang on a second.
You have to pick exactly which screen you want to share.
Oh, yeah.
So you just do
yes, you are right.
Screen and it should work.
You are right about that. You know that. Right, how about now?
Let's give it a second.
No,
normally it takes a couple of seconds to do.
Oh, yeah, okay, all right.
No, did you press allow?
Yeah, I've allowed it to. I've pressed it. It said share now, so I don't know why.
Yes, it's up.
Oh, okay, all right, okay. So we are in session 3, and then we're hopefully going to cover the tail end of a rukn al-awwal, because I didn't cover the argument from tasalsul or infinite regress. I'll do that now because I want to just go through it. It's a very simple one. We don't need to go through the huge technicalities. I just want you to understand the basic concept of what it is, and then I want to go through a rukn al-thani to a rukn al-sabi', and I think that's straightforward because we don't really have to read all the Arabic text, because from 2 until 7, Ghazali is just going to go through, or all the way 2 until 8 actually, all the way to 2 until the end actually. He's going to go through a via negativa. He's just going to say what Allah is not. So he's going to negate of Allah pretty much the entire spectrum of properties that are attributable to finite or temporally originated entities, i.e. muhdathat or hadithat. Yeah. So that's the outline there. What I hope to do is go through some discussion points as well as we go along. Obviously, there's more that you can, inshallah, bring in, and then we'll entertain them. So some of the discussion points you should be able to see on the screen is one, how coherent is the idea of divine eternity? So we need to think about that. How coherent is the idea of divine immutability? And I know we touched on that a bit last week. And how coherent is the idea of divine simplicity? And do the mutakallimun, whether Hujjatul Islam or others, do they hold to a strong notion of any of these ideas of divine attributes, so eternity, immutability, and simplicity? So let's get to what I wanted to go through with regarding Hujjatul Islam's tail end proof for why the world is originated. And if you remember last session, we looked at the three claims he made with regards to why the world was originated in time. And having gone through that, I then stopped at the additional proof, which is the argument for the impossibility of an actual infinite being realized, and that being an impossible because of the absurdities it leads to. And this is what he mentions now. So if you look at the screen, you should be able to see the Risalah Qudsiyyah Arabic text that obviously we've been going through. So he says if you go halfway down the page where it says وَلِأَنَّهُ لَوْ كَانَ لِلْفَلَكِ, if you see that. So he's saying, in addition to the three claims he made we discussed last time, that, the three claims were that, bodies are not free from motion, being stationary or being in motion. And then the second being that motion, being motionary or being stationary or being in motion, are contingent or temporally originated properties. They're hadithan. That was the second claim. And the third claim was that whatever ma la yakhlu anil hawadith fahuwa hadith, whatever is not free from any changes or temporal originations or temporal changes, i.e. changes in times or events within them, adding these three together, it's impossible that the world not be finite and temporal. And if the world is temporal and finite, then it must be in need of a cause. And the cause must be... Yeah. Oh,
yeah, it should be fine. You missed the last point.
Can you hear me now? Oh, sorry. So what I was saying was, if the world is composed of bodies that are either moving or stationary, and if movement and stationary are qualities or properties of temporally originated things, i.e. contingent things, and if the metaphysical maxim ma la yakhlu an al-hawadith fahuwa hadith, and if the maxim that whatever has events or changes in them are temporal, whatever events and changes in things apply to objects that have these properties, then these objects themselves must be temporal and originated. So given these three claims put together, it must follow that the world is also temporal and originated, because it's a collection of bodies that undergo changes in time. So if the world is just a collection of things that undergo events or changes in time, then the world is something that is contingent and undergoes change in time. And if it undergoes change in time, then it requires a cause to bring it about. That cause has to be beyond the temporal series or the events going back in time. And the best explanation for that is an eternal, uncaused, atemporal being, or something like that. Now, the additional proof he then gives is the idea of using the notion of infinity, i.e. even and odd. So he says there, halfway down the page, وَلِأَنَّهُ لَوْ كَانَ لِلْفَلَكِ دَوْرَاتٍ لَا نِهَايَ لَهَا لَكَانَ لَا يَخْلُ عَدَدُهَا مِنْ أَنْ يَكُونَ شَفَعًا أَوْ وَتْرًا أو شفعا ووترا جميعا أو لا شفعا ولا وترا ومحال أن يكون شفعا ووترا جميعا أولا شفعا أو لا شفعا ولا وترا جميعا فإن ذلك جمع بين النفي والإثبات إذ في إثبات أحدهما نفي الآخر وفي نفي أحدهما إثبات الآخر ومحال أن يكون شفعا لأن الشفع يصير وترا بزيادة واحد فكيف يعوز ما لا نهاية له واحد ومحال أن يكون وترا إذا الوتر يسير sorry, I don't know why the page is gone. I don't know, we lost it there, sorry. Yeah, there we are. Yeah, إذا الوتر يسير شفعا بواحد فيكون يعوز واحد مع أنه لا نهاية لإعدادها ومحال أن يكون لا شفعا ولا وترا إذ له نهاية فيحصل من هذا أن العالم لا يخلو عن الحوادث فهو إذن حادث. So إذا ثبت حدوثه كان افتقاره إلى المحدث من مدركات بالضرورة. So all he's saying simply here, look, if we take a planet, right, any celestial body, if it has an infinite number of revolutions, then we would never be able to add or take away to the number of its revolutions. So clearly, if okay, so there are four possibilities. Now there's a handout here. Let me just put it up, so it might be better for you to be able to see it. Otherwise, you won't be able to. So he says here, if you can see the screen, if a planet has infinite revolutions, for example, then the number of its revolutions are either going to be odd, even, neither odd nor even, or both odd and even. Now, what Ghazali says is that none of these possibilities can apply to an infinite number of planetary revolutions. Why? Because we're going to have absurdities. Right, so how are we going to have absurdities? Well, if we accept that a planet has neither odd nor even revolutions, and both odd and even revolutions, then that's a bit contradictory. Because you can only either have one or the other, right? Either it's one of an odd number of revolutions or an even number of revolutions. It can't be both, because that's contradictory, because you're having odd and even together, yeah? And if it's neither odd and even, then you're saying it's none of these revolutions. Okay. So you're saying it's neither or both. You can't have that. That's contradictory according to Hujjat al-Islam. If we say that the number of revolutions is odd only, then if it's odd, then it's possible to make it even by adding one more. But an infinity is already complete, so it can't be in need of another number to make it complete. So it can't be number one either. It can't be odd. If it's number two even, then we can always ask, or we can always add another number to make it odd. But if we already have an infinity is complete and doesn't need another to make it from even to odd. So, we're going to get these absurdities where we're going to be able to add on to complete an infinity, but an infinity is supposed to be complete. Infinity has all the numbers. So, if we accept that there was an infinite number of revolutions, and we're going to have to contend with actually infinite number of revolutions, we're going to have to contend with these absurdities. So what Ghazali is trying to show is that, look, if you've got an infinite number of orbits or revolutions, you're going to get these. You're going to have to face these absurdities, because there can only be one of these four possibilities. And if it's a possibility number one, if it's an odd number of revolutions, that can't be right, because we can always make an odd even by adding one more. But an infinite is complete. It isn't in need of another number because it's got all the numbers. If it's even number of revolutions, well, we can always add one more number to make it odd. But that can't be right, because an infinity isn't in need of adding another number because it's already complete. It has all the numbers. And we can't say, it doesn't make sense to say that a revolution of a planet is both odd and even, because that's contradictory, because you're giving two contradictory things to the same object, and it can't be neither of them either. So what we're left with, the conclusion that it can't be possible for there to be an infinite number of an infinite number of revolutions or rotations. So that's his additional proof in order to show that that the world is temporally originated in time. So if this is the case, فيحصل من هذا أن العالم لا يخلو عن الحوادث فهو إذن حادث. So if we accept that, then we have to accept that that the world is not infinite, it's not eternal, it's originated in time. And if it's originated in time because it's got other objects in it that are also originated and require change from one moment to another, or have events that are within it, it follows that if the world is an aggregate of all of these things, then the world too is temporally originated and finite. And if it's temporally originated and finite, كان افتقاره إلى المحدث, then it requires a cause to bring it into existence. And that cause, which he mentions in the next foundation, which we'll look at, that cause cannot be part of a temporal series, because if it's part of a temporal series, then we can always ask what brought that cause into being. And then if that cause is part of the temporal series, then we can always ask again, well, what brought the cause of the cause into being? And then we can, if the answer is, well, part of the finite temporal series, well, then we can ask again, what brought the cause of the cause of the cause into being ad infinitum. But we will never be able to explain why we have the world now if we're going to go back infinitely, if we're going to regress temporally backwards. So we need a terminus, something to bring about the cause that is not part of the temporal series going backwards. It's got to be outside of the temporal regress. And that is the only category that fits that conceptually, is what he calls an eternal being, a cause that is azali. And we'll look at that quickly in the next foundation. So I know I kind of bumbled on with this one. Have anyone got any questions on that? The infinity, even and odd argument. Because if not, we'll just move to the next foundation.
It seems like nobody's.
Yeah, I mean, what I like about the way the Jerusalem Epistle done it, and obviously in the al-Iqtisād fil i'tiqād, he fleshes out in more detail, but he just puts it quite simply here. That look, it's either one of these four possibilities. It's either one of these. Yeah.
Salim, have a question.
Assalamu alaikum. Okay. Yeah,
Just
a quick one about the context. Why do you think, is he using the context of celestial objects because of the Avicennian kind of background? Because obviously they're talking about, celestial objects. Why take that particular example to demonstrate the notion of infinity in your view?
I think some of the context is because he wants to use a physical object that is temporal, has parts. Because I think it's to do with the philosopher's denial of it's something to do with the, if I remember correctly, it's to do with the Burhan al-Tatbiq issue. I think because the philosophers accepted it on conditions, wasn't it? They accepted the Burhan al-Tatbiq on condition. I think they accepted it on. They maintain that Burhan al-Tatbiq works on part. I think it works on bodies, isn't it? I'm not. I think the philosophers accepted the Burhan al-Tatbiq proof works on objects whose parts all exist simultaneously, like the parts of a body. So you can't have. It's impossible to have an infinite large amount of bodies to exist. But the events of the past, because they've transpired, they don't currently exist. So the philosopher said the Burhan al-Tatbiq doesn't apply to events that have already transpired, i.e. they've gone. Those past events are not there anymore physically. So it might be that he's got that in the back of his mind, which is obviously Avicennan, isn't it? So the Burhan al-Tatbiq being selectively applied. The other thing as well is the example is quite vivid to use. So it has some kind of explanatory force in that sense, because it clearly it's contradictory to say a planet has made all these infinite revolutions already, because then of the absurdities that it entails. I'm not sure, Imran, if that. So what I'm trying to say is, I think the context he has at the back of his mind is one, the Burhan al-Tatbiq, the philosopher's selective application of the Burhan al-Tatbiq, i.e., you can't have it on physical objects, because you can't have an infinite object extended in the space, but you can have it on temporal events going back in the past, because those events have gone and disappeared. So I think that's probably in the back of his mind. And the fact that for an Aqidah text like this, using a planet and its rotation is probably like sort of a more a physical sort of vivid example to use. Allahu A'lam. I mean, those are the two things that immediately jump out of my mind. But come back and let me know if there's anything else that you feel that that can be added to this point.
No, it's just fine, because from my reading, a lot of the Abyssinians, they love their kind of celestial objects that they're talking about, those issues and using that as examples and kind of thing. So just that kind of same symbolism really comes to me and such. That's what I was asking.
Yeah, definitely, because it was all about because Aristotelians, it's all about circular motion, isn't it, of the heavens. So you're right, it could be, that whole backdrop with the celestial motions of the planets, definitely. But I'm pretty sure, and correct me for those who have a better, maybe have had a fresher reading, but I'm sure it's also something to do with the Burhan Tatbiq application. So the Burhan Tatbiq doesn't apply to bodies, but it can apply to infinite body or something like that, infinite large body, but not to temporally infinite regressive events, because events come and go and they disappear. They don't exist in the past somewhere. So something like the Burhan al-Tatbiq only working on the actual infinite, something like that. Allahu A'lam. Yeah, come back on that. I know that's kind of sort of bumbled response there, but maybe I'll have to think a bit more about why the planets is what he chose. Yeah, it's definitely he's got Avicenna on the front of his mind, and the philosophers and the celestial and their preoccupation with like celestial motion. So I'll have to think about it. I'll have to think about that more. See what I can say on that one. All right. So the whole concept about infinity really is this: don't worry about some of the modern technical machinery that's being applied from physics, mathematics, especially set theory, things like that. You don't really have to worry about that to get to the simplicity of the argument. All the argument is saying is that to explain objects as they exist now in time, you cannot explain it being how it is now, originating in time now, if you admit there is a past infinite series. You can't get to where you have now if you accept there is an actually infinite past series of events that have transpired to reach now. That's all Hujjat al-Islam is saying. Same with the planets. You can't get your number of revolution of the planets if you've already if Saturn or whatever the planet that he mentions has already undergone an infinite number of rotations. It would have completed all of the number of rotations there are to complete before it's even done before it's even completed any rotation. And then what he wants to do is to show how there are certain absurdities that come about if you accept that kind of notion. That's all you need to sort of accept on this point, that to explain something now, you can't explain that with there being an infinite chain going backwards. There has to be a terminus somewhere, because then if there's no terminus, then it doesn't explain what you have right now. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to explain something right now. So that's the argument, really. And if there isn't an infinite regress going backwards of temporal events, then there must be a terminus. There must be a point at which somebody brought that chain of that chain of events or causes into being. Now, the second the usul that he mentions is that the temporal regress going backwards of events cannot end at someone who's also part of the chain. That makes sense. Yeah. So if the cause is part of the chain, then we can keep asking, what is the cause of the cause that is part of the chain going backwards? So in order to explain what we have now, we have to have a cause at which the chain going backwards terminates, and the terminus, the point at which the chain terminates, the cause has to be beyond that chain of events. And that is al-asl al-thani. This is where he goes into al-asl al-thani. So he says here, al-asl al-thani, al-ilm bi-anna al-bari ta'ala qadimun lam yazal azaliyun laysa li-wujudihi awwal بل هو أول كل شيء وقبل كل حي وميت وبرهانه أنه لو كان حادثا لم يكن قديما لافتقر هو أيضا إلى محدث وافتقر محدثه إلى محدث ويتسلسل ذلك إلى غير نهاية وما تسلسل لم يتحصل أو ينتهي إلى محدث قديم هو الأول وذلك هو المطلوب الذي سميناه صانع العالم وبارئه ومحدثه ومبدعه. So he's saying, look, now we're on the second foundation, al-asl al-thani. If the cause is part of the temporal regress of events going backwards, then we can always ask, what is the cause of that cause? But we can't keep going back infinitely, can we? Because then we're never going to explain that the object that we have now, we're never going to be able to explain the world coming into being in time now. So, so it has to terminate at something which is qadim and azali. So it has to terminate at something which is eternal and pre-existent and doesn't have a beginning. So that's al-asl al-thani. Any points on that one? So the al-asl al-thani connects with the first one because the two link. So once you accept that there's an impossibility of there being an infinite regress going backwards, well, then you have to now anchor it in a cause that is beyond that regress. If you don't, then you're going to keep adding to the regress. So we don't want to ride the regress, yeah? We want to get out of the regress. But if you keep saying the cause is part of the regress, then you're riding the regress.
Doc, would this be the point about I think you mentioned it last week that you might bring it up again today, but the belief of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, the Qidam al-Alam, is that related to this point specifically?
I guess so, yeah, I guess so. I mean, Shaykh al-Islam is, is just a unique theologian. I mean, someone's got to do, I think, a proper, systematic presentation of his theology. And then once we've systematically, presented his theology, his argument for the origination of the world, his argument, about the world not being originated in terms of the way the mutakallimun have argued it, then we can start to assess it. So, yeah, I mean, yeah, to go through it, what I'll do is maybe set out what I understand his argument to be in a handout, and then those who have a read of it maybe can have a read of it, and then we can come back on that in a session. What do people think about that? Would that be beneficial? Because rather than trying to sort of, without seeing maybe pictorially or in a diagram what he's trying to say, essentially. But yeah, but his view isn't the view of the mutakallimun for a fact. Definitely. I mean, remember, he's got whole ideas about what time, motion, matter is.
Yeah.
So all of that has to come in. That comes into play about how he's understanding metaphysics. Plus, he's based on his theology, his hermeneutics. He's accepting that if Allah says he's done this, he's done it. Can you see? If Allah says this was with me, this was with him. If Allah says, well, I'll move from here to here, well, that's what he did, Jalla wa ala. So he's got a whole different hermeneutics as well, which is important for understanding his view. Allahu alam, yeah. But it's worth knowing what his view is.
Yeah, I think we'll leave it till next week.
Yeah.
All right.
Cool. Now, al-asl al-thalith. Now, hopefully we can quite speedily move ahead now, because the third, al-asl al-thalith ila sabi', like I said, the third foundation to the seventh foundation is just now, or the second fundamental, all the way to the seventh fundamental, just mentions what Allah is not. So the second fundamental, if you look at the screen, it just mentions that we have to have knowledge that Allah is pre-existent and eternal. So he was before everything in creation. He is everlasting, and that he's one. Then the third, al-asl al-thalith, it says that we have to have knowledge that Allah is eternal without beginning or end, which means that he's a necessary being. And to use this term, that he is personal. And then I'm not going to go through the proof there. I'll go for that quite simply. Then the fourth, al-asl al-rabi', he says that we have to have knowledge that Allah is not a substance. So Allah is not a substance. Laysa bi jawhar. That is bounded. Yeah, that is bounded. But he says, بل تعالى يتقدس عن مناسبة الحيز. So he's obviously, Allah is not hayyiz. He's not he's not bounded by anything. He's not encompassed by anything. But substances are. So he can't be a substance. So if he can't be a substance, then it means he's not omnitemporal. He's not everywhere in space. He's not enclosed by anything or encompassed by anything. Nothing can go around him or behind him or in front of him, i.e. engulf him. And it also means that he's not conditioned by anything. So he can't be a substance, because substances are bounded. Yeah. They are not free from motion and being stationary, things like that. And as we said, these are hadithan, isn't it? These are events and changes, and anything which undergoes change or an event in itself, then it's hadith, it's temporally originated. So Allah can't be a substance. And then he says laysa bijism, and he also isn't a body. So he's not a jism mu'allaf, he's not a jism, a body that is composite, right? Because a body is, by its definition, something composite. So if he was composite, then it means that he's dependent on the parts that compose him. And it would also mean he's physical. But that's impossible, because then he's physical, he's dependent on something, because he's composed of parts, and he would be dependent on each of its parts in order to make him a whole. But that can't be right. So he can't be a body. So he can't be a substance. He can't be a body. He can't be. He can't have a beginning, and he can't have an end. And then he says, al-asl al-sadis, al-ilm bi-annahu ta'ala laysa bi-arad. So Allah is not a accident. Well, obviously it follows that, can't be a contingent property, can he? That doesn't make sense. If he's a contingent property, then he would be a part of something, because accidents are properties that attach to substances. If he was an accident, an arad, he would be incorporated into something else. That's impossible. If he was an arad, then he would be preceded in time by something, because arad come into existence and then they come out of existence. They lack. So the property of being tall, you could at some point be tall and not be tall. You could lack that property. Let's say the color brownness or whatever. You could be brown one time, but then you could use that brownness. But if Allah was an accident, then he'll be preceded by something before he becomes that thing, and that can't be right. And the other thing is that he would have to be contingent if he was an accident, which means he requires a cause. That can't be right. So he can't be an arad. It's impossible that he's an arad. He's an accident. And then al-asl al-sabi' الأصل العلم بأنه تعالى منزه الذات عن الاختصاص بالجهاد. So the seventh one is that Allah's essence is transcendent, above anything, beyond any limitations, whatever those limitations are, whether that's direction or any other way that we can fathom a limitation to be. So Allah's essence is far beyond, above and beyond any limitations. So those all are the way that Allah negates. That's the way that Hujjat Islam is negating what Allah is. What he's saying, what Allah is not. So he's using a via negativa sort of approach here. So Allah is none of these things. And if he's none of these things, then this conception of a deity, the fact that Allah is eternal, the fact that he is not, he doesn't have a form, he's not limited, he's determined in scope, he's not bounded by anything, he's not a substance, he's not an atom, he's not a composite body, he doesn't have extension, he's not divisible, he doesn't have a substrate, he doesn't have a substrate in which other qualities are in him, and he is not part of a substrate of anything else bigger than him. He doesn't resemble creation, of course. He doesn't have anything equal to him. He's not measurable in any way. He's not encompassed by a place. He doesn't have an up, a below, a left or right. Jalla wa ala. So all of these things are absolute negations of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not. And that means that any other conception of what a cause of the universe is negated. So he negates Platonism. He negates panentheism. He negates the Trinity. Obviously, he negates any form of deism or polytheism. So any concept of a divinity that you have that doesn't meet this standard, it cannot be Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So a whole litany of things are negated by this concept of Allah Jalla wa ala. So any question on that before I go on to explain a bit about al-asl al-thamin, I think it is. Let me just check what that is. Eighth fundamental. I'll talk about the handout a bit as well, because some people are asked about that. So what you're going to see from al-asl al-thani to al-asl al-sabi', from the sixth fundamental to the seventh fundamental, is that Allah is an utterly independent, ontologically independent being. And in contemporary metaphysics, this is the idea of ontological dependence, and you can see that on the handout. And I've given some outlines about that, and you can read up on it if you want. If you find it complicated, don't worry about it. All you need to know about something being ontologically independent is that everything depends on this ontological being. Everything else's ontology depends on this being, but this being doesn't depend on anything else for its ontology. So
Doc, I have a
yeah,
question.
sorry. Yeah, go on, sorry.
this is I've always, you know, the idea of the composite bodies that Allah Jalla
Yes.
wa'ala is made up of parts.
Yes,
And then the argument is that because if he's made up of parts, he now depends on those parts.
absolutely. Yeah.
What does that then entail now if Allah Jalla wa'ala depends on a part of himself?
Well, you have to spell out the terms here. So if you're saying Allah is composite,
Right.
a taklif applies to him. You first have to, from what we understand, what a part and whole is, isn't it? And how parts and wholes are in relation. And this is where we talk about mereology. If you remember, I touched on it last week and the week before last. This is the study of parthood, i.e., your parts in relation to make a whole. Now, if Allah was composed of parts, then what we're in effect we're saying is that if we're saying that he's composed of parts, in some way, in order for him to be what he is, he has to rely on those parts coming together in the specific way that they do to make him him. Yeah. So if you give an example, let me just think. I don't know. Transformer like Devastator, right? Devastator can only be Devastator if the little Decepticons that make up Devastator make him up the way that they make him up in order to be what he is. He cannot be Devastator if all those parts or those Decepticons just suddenly disintegrate or separate from him. He no longer is Devastator. So things like that. So if we're going to say that Allah is going to depend on his own parts for him to be the kind of being that he is.
Doc, your voice is lagging.
Yeah, sorry. If we are going to say that Allah is composed, Allah is reliant to be the kind of being that he is on the very parts that he has, then we're making him a being dependent on his parts being configured in a certain way. That makes him dependent. That makes his very being, his ontology, dependent on the way those parts are, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So he would have to be only based on the way those parts come together. That's problematic. That's very problematic. Not only that, if you're saying Allah is composed of parts, then conceptually you can apply the concept of divisibility to him. That's impossible to make Allah divisible.
Ultimately, it all comes down to whatever causes him to become hadith is not allowed, right?
Absolutely, based on that metaphysical axiom that we said, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's what's used. Ghazali's used it already 3 times.
So is he basing this on that things that are hadith, he's seen that normally they depend on their parts, etc., etc. Therefore, now Allah can't depend on his parts. Is that what?
Yeah, because remember the quantifier kullu or ma. That ma is a particle that can be ʿulūm, isn't it? It can denote generality, so it can be a quantifier, and kullu is a quantifier, universal quantifier. Now, the domain of quantification includes Allah. So the axiom applies to Allah equally to every being. So whatever is not free from changes or events.
But the principle itself is derived from personal experience and whatever, like what Mona Waste mentioned last week.
From the reality.
The juz'i to the kulli. Okay.
Yeah, that's right. From the reality, because mutakallimun are working from empirical reality, perceptible data.
Exactly. Okay, that makes much more sense.
Yeah. So once you know the essence of something, isn't it? If something fits a description or has the same essence, then it will have the same entailments as well.
Yeah, makes sense.
So yeah, so that's why he is trying to negate. That means as well Allah is incorporeal, obviously, because he's not physical. He's timeless. He's unchanging. All of these things. All of these things.
In the Jerusalem Epistle, you have a section on the perfection of Allah. Is that part of this 228?
Yes, definitely, because once you negate what Allah is not, yeah, and then at the same time you affirm of Him, you know, what makes Him what they call sifatul kamal. So the attributes that perfect Him. So any attribute that, you know, it entails imperfection, they cannot be attributed to Him. And what He's just negated, Allah can't be any of these things because they're not from the sifatul kamal. Because we can always conceive, we can conceive something greater than Him otherwise. Can you see?
Okay.
Because why? Because the ulama say He's mustaghniyan an ziyadat al-istikmal. Allah cannot, there's nothing that can make Him more greater than what He already is, Jalla wa ala. Can you see? But if you say He's a substance or He's a body, He's an atom, He's a arad, He is temporal, you can always add on, conceivably that is, to make Him better, isn't it?
But
so
who defines this concept of greatness?
Well, first of all, we're working from rationally, yeah. You're in order for an object that comes about and doesn't come about, i.e., at one point is there and then it's gone. That, according to the mind, is not a property that is worthy for a human being's utter religious submission. Can you see? So a being that is that's part of another greater being, that itself would mean that why should I worship this being that's part of another greater being? Why don't I worship the other greater being that this being is part of? Because this being has a lack in some way. And if it has a lack or an imperfection in some way, it doesn't offer me any confidence that I should devote. It doesn't make it an object of religious worship. It doesn't make it a ma'bud. It doesn't make it mustahiq lil ibadah. It doesn't make it worthy of my total adoration, love, worship, and submission. Why is it not equal to me? Why don't I then self-worship?
But when you define this greatness, do you do it in relation to yourself? So I'm deficient, so I need something that's, or how do you get this idea of, what about someone says, for me, a temporarily originated God is good enough, like the Hindus or something?
Yeah. So then you asked me, look, so why don't I just worship this finite creature? It's massive, but it's still finite, right? But it's massive, it's still temporal. Right. Why don't I worship it? But then I can always ask the question, well, why not worship something greater than it?
Yeah, okay.
Why not? But why? I'm perfectly entitled to ask, okay, so let's take the biggest thing on the planet. Well, why don't I worship the planet then, which is bigger than everything on the planet? But then you come along and say to me, but you know what? There's another bigger planet that's bigger than your planet that you want to worship. Why don't you worship that one? And I'm like scratching my head thinking, that's true. There's nothing rationally to obstruct me from. Then you come along and say, someone else comes along and says, but the planet that you said is bigger than this planet, why don't you worship that planet? Because that's got 63 moons as well. It controls 63 moons. And I'm like, oh God, yeah, that's another property. It's got 63 moons that's under its control. That's greater than your planet. So you can always find some relative way by which you can make something greater.
But is this the ontological argument to an extent?
You could take it down the ontological route. The ulama didn't take that route. They just says whatever is mustaghniyan an ziyadat al-istikmal, whatever cannot in any way be conceivably increased in its perfection, that is the most perfect being. So you find this in Shaykh al-Islam al-Izz ibn Abd al-Salam, you find it in other scholars, this way of explaining Allah's sifat al-kamal. He's perfect, his attributes of perfection. So whoever has those attributes of perfection, that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then obviously we've got the textual inspiration in Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam, isn't it?
Yeah, I was thinking about that.
Yeah, so because that is the primary, that is what al-Ash'ari uses, and others, for why rational reflection on nazar, is the way to arrive at the cause of the universe being, an infinite, not an infinite, sorry, but a being that is beyond all limitations and imperfections.
Yeah.
So Allah cannot be all these things. He cannot be immaterial. He cannot be material. Sorry, he cannot be material. He cannot be extended in space or whatever. He cannot be an accident. He cannot change. He cannot be any of these things. He cannot have a direction. He cannot be encompassed. He cannot be enclosed by everyone or anything, because then he will always be able to be made greater. So yes, I would say the perfect being theology, the maximum being theology, that kind of, we have precedents for it in our theology, definitely. Because what else does mustaghniyan an ziyadat al-istikmal mean? Nothing can conceivably add to Allah's perfection. So he must be a maximally perfect being. So you can see this kind of being is radically different from the beings of the philosopher, of modern day deism. I know some Muslims who profess deism. They have a minimal idea of a deity.
Maybe if you define deism, Doc.
Oh, so deism is the belief that reason can establish the existence of an ultimate cause for all of reality, but this God is kind of non-interventionist. This cause, call it God or whatever, is non-interventionist in the natural order. So it doesn't do anything. It doesn't. There's nothing that it's not involved in. It doesn't providentially organize all of history, and it doesn't intervene in human history. It just created the clock, created the world, wound it up, and just let it unwind. And this is very different from the kind of entity or being or object depicted in Scripture. So so deism is that there's a cause of the natural order beyond the natural order, but that being is otiose, so it's not doing anything.
Doc, we got a question.
Sure.
Brother Shahir has typed a question. He's asking,
Further.
can the Sheikh please explain what he said regarding whether Allah has parts or not? I wasn't able to understand.
Oh, okay. All right. So, okay. Allah, Hujjatul Islam says that Allah cannot be a composite thing. It's not a jism mu'allaf. Yeah. So he cannot be something which is composed of other things. Because in order to be composed of other things, we can meaningfully ask of Allah that he can be, the concept of divisibility applies to him. That's impossible. Second, he would have to depend on the parts that make him up, being the way the parts are. So he'd have to depend on the way the parts come together in order for him to be the whole that he is. But that means he's now dependent on something else for him to be what he needs to be. And that's impossible for a being who's supposed to be qadim, azali, perfect, and so on. So those are sort of two of the main reasons why he cannot be a composite being. Yeah.
I'll just wait
He's a
for Brother
simple
Shahir
being in that sense.
to confirm.
Yeah.
If he has. I mean, if you guys want to turn mics on and engage that
Yeah,
way.
please. Yeah.
How to make
We're gonna. This is the bit we're gonna end anyway, because I'm not going to start on the throne on an asl thamin, because that requires going over Hujjatul Islam hermeneutics, which I want to do next week, inshallah.
That's the Qanun al-Kulli.
Yeah, that's the one.
I think that'll be a very good place to finish. I had a question actually, but let me just.
Where are we? What I was going to go through. Yeah, come back, Shane, if you feel that wasn't clear.
It was clear, thank you. Jazakallah khair.
Yeah,
Sheikh, this idea of the personal God, I mean, what do you mean by personal God here? Because I saw a Christian conception of what personal God is very different to our conception of a personal God. Or am I?
Yeah. Look, people, you're right. Maybe I should clarify it, yeah, because I don't often use this term, because it's not necessarily used by the mutakallimun, you see. Okay, so first of all, let me explain a term that is used in contemporary philosophical theology, and that is the idea of theistic personalism. Yeah. Theistic personalism is to say that that the creator of all reality is not unlike a person, but that, you know, it is a personal. It's like a person, but that person is like has all the great making properties. Has all. It's not like you and me as a person, but it is a unique kind of person, unlike anything. So it's got the qualities of a person, but it's not like you and me as like a finite creature, but it's still a person. It has a mind. It has a will. It has knowledge. It has all the qualities you and I have, but it has it in a very perfect way. So that's theistic personalism. Sorry about my son's in the background. Whereas when we use personal being, we're saying that does the cause of the universe have a will? Does it have knowledge, and does it have power? So that's the difference. When the mutakallimun didn't use the word that the cause of all reality is like a person. They didn't use that. They didn't use that terminology. So it's a modern terminology. So I don't like to use it, although a lot of people in the Dawah do use that term. But again, it goes back to, you know, does Allah have a will? Yes. Is the creator of the universe have a will? Yes. Does he have knowledge? Yes. Does he have power? Yes. Is that sufficient to define something as the cause as a person? I mean, I don't know. I don't know. All I'm saying is the mutakallimun didn't use that term, person. But is it not abstract? Of course, it's not an abstract object. It's not a Platonic, inert, you know, entity. Definitely, but it has certain qualities that are attributed to a to a being that is personal. Yes, that's true. That's true.
Doc, would this explain, for example, the خلقوا بأخلاق الله خلق الله آدم في صورته? Those sort of concepts
you can build a theological case, and this is Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah's position, that Allah is not a concept or an abstract being. He's a creator that is a personal creator. He's got all the qualities Jalla wa Ala that he mentioned he's got, and they're not the qualities of some abstract or a philosopher's God. Can you see? So people who've got a problem with that, he says, are the philosopher and the mutakallimun, because they believe that these qualities, you know, lead to Allah being having temporal events in him, originations in him. So yeah, so there is that divergence.
Doc, you mentioned arad and accidents. Maybe if somebody hasn't heard about them before, you could expand on them.
Yeah, an accident is just a quality of an object, and that quality you can either have or not have. Or you can have it and you can not have it. You can. It's not necessary that you have it. So if it's not necessary that you have it, then at some point that quality may not exist. So the qualities that make up you, that don't define you in your essence, are your qualities that are accidental. So the fact that you're wearing, it's the fact that you are a certain height, have a certain eye color, certain hair color. Now these things you can imagine you having otherwise, and you will be you. So let's say the color of your skin, you can still imagine yourself being you with different color skin. People get a tan all the time. They go on holiday, they come back looking like an orange. Yeah. But their skin is pale. So you can conceive of yourself having qualities other than how you actually have them. And if you can, conceive of yourself having a quality other than how you have it now, that's an accident. That's something that is not necessary for you to be you. So these are known as accidental qualities or contingent properties.
I think Mullah is asking if he can come.
Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa
Wa alaikum assalam wa lana ahlan wa sahlan.
Yeah, Sheikhna, sorry, I missed the al-Asl al-Rabi' discussion, and I think it pertains to what you just mentioned right now, where he says, فَإِن سَمَّاهُ مُسَمٍّ جَوْهَرًا وَلَمْ يُرِدْ بِهِ الْمُتَحَيِّزَ كَانَ مُخْطِئًا مِنْ حَيْثُ اللُّغَةُ لَا مِنْ حَيْثُ الْمَعْنَى. So, like the definition, like I had this long discussion with my Aqidah teacher once, why I was saying to him that in Mantiq, you can call God Jawhar, and it fits the description. So just to recap the point that I think was being asked, what is the definition of Jawhar and Arad? So the Manatiqas argue that Jawhar is something that's mustaqillul wujud, qa'imun bidhat. And since Jawhar is a abstract reality, is what comes to the mind.
That's right.
There's nothing wrong with saying that God, not Allah per se, but just idol gods, more than one.
Right.
This is something that can so Allah is Jawhar in this sense.
In that had that you definitely. That's what they say.
And Arad, of course, is غير مستقل الوجود, something that isn't independent, but ما يحتاج إلى الغير لوجوده. What depends on something else in order to exist or manifest, like anger, beauty. These things don't exist in and of themselves, but they'll find within a mahal. They're found within a person or a body. So the question I wanted to ask is, the mutakallimun, especially the Ash'ari, I've seen them where they argue that you can't call Allah a Jawhar, and it's linked with the idea that Jawhar is mutahayyiz. Jawhar is found in time and space, and of course Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is beyond time and space. How do they link this here? So Jawhar is therefore necessarily linked to time and space. I was wondering if you could refer me to a text. Do you think does Ghazali rahimahullah discuss this in the al-Iqtisad, this particular point here?
He doesn't know, from what I remember. He doesn't, because what he doesn't do, what you will notice Hujjat al-Islam's method, and I think I don't know if I mentioned it in the first lesson, but I've got it in the notes. He doesn't do comparative analysis. He doesn't do this. He doesn't say like he doesn't do what Imam al-Juwayni does or what others do. Some of our teachers say he doesn't do that.
He doesn't. فَإِن قُلْتَ قُلْتُ.
No, he doesn't do that. He doesn't take that dialectical approach like al-Ḥāmid does later on, and others before him as well. And I think this is because Hujjat al-Islam is his own authority. I believe that. My personal view, you know, I stand to be corrected definitely, and you know, and I'm just saying my view is, I think he takes himself as his own authority. That's just who's gonna tell him he's not his own authority?
No, of course.
Yeah. So someone like, it reminds me of someone like Imam Suyuti or someone like that. But so I think that's why. So, but why some of the Ash'ari said you can use Jawhar. It depends whether they use that a Jawhar is bounded, whether they use that as part of the ta'rif or the had. I got to check that, Sheikh, because I'm not.
Yeah, because the definition that I remember going through in Mantiq had nothing to do with time space.
Yeah,
هو وجود يعني اصلا just وجود. And you know, we've discussed that Allah is wajib al-wujud, يعني هو خدا, right? So to say that he's not Jawhar then necessarily means that he doesn't exist, which is somewhat problematic, right? Well, it's very problematic.
Yeah, just like the word shay. It's like the word shay, isn't it?
Al-mawjud, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Shay is just al-mawjud. Then it doesn't, in terms of mantiq, it doesn't. It's not incorrect. It's not invalid to apply it to Allah, but again, it's about comportment. This is about adab. You know, should you say Allah is a shaykh? Because then some people think a shaykh is something mu'allaf, and then you know, ta'leef idea gets in their head, and then so just like as I was saying before, I think I'm not sure if you were there, but we're saying whether Allah can be described as a person, and though the mutakallimun don't use that term person, because of the iltizam of what a person means, they're like, whoa, we don't use the word that Allah is a person or personal. But Shaykh al-Islam's got no problem with that. He's like, Allah says it's like this, what's your problem? But so it's other. But does he have irada? Of course he does. Jalla wa ala. Does he have ilm? Of course he does. Does he have qudra? Of course he does. So these things are part of what makes something a being that is personal. So yeah, I have to check that. I really have to check that. I don't know off the top of my head. I need to check where the discussion was. But Hujjat al-Islam doesn't do that. He doesn't bring that. Yeah, barakallah fi. So my apology for not. That's the answer, Sheikh, is what I'm saying.
No, just one last thing about our discussion, or the last discussion you had on modern day deism.
Yes.
Yes, I'm aware of. Who was it? I forget his name now. But anyway, just on the top of my head, the idea that deism or deists believe that Allah created the world and then he no longer intervenes, or he cannot intervene, depending on what strand of deism we're talking about. If someone, for example, as a Muslim deist, believes that Allah created the system, and you know, like sunnatullah.
Yeah.
That Allah created these things. He created the asbab, and he put the power and the qualities and all of these things in the so he put the agency of fire to burn this. Like, technically speaking, I think this goes to the discussion of you know, khalq and asbab. So if for example a Muslim deist believes that Allah has created all of these things, and he's put the agency and power and qualities in all of these things, and if he so wishes to intervene, he can do so, only that this would mean that it's a miracle, it's supernatural. Would that be problematic?
All I would say is, I think this is what Hujjat al-Islam said. Obviously, minimally, rationally, deism passed some kind of minimal standard that there is a creator of the world. As long as you don't believe it's in the world, that set the natural order following certain rules and laws. Nomologically speaking, he set the qanun. Rationally, if you stop there, the thing is this: does the deist deny what the other parts of the Quran and Hadith Mutawatira affirm of Allah? As long as they don't deny that part, that's the issue, you see. Because a deist could believe that. Does he believe in an akhirah? I don't know. I don't think it's part of deism to believe in the afterlife. and then there's punishment reward. Now, Hujjatul Islam, you have to believe in Allah, messengers, and the afterlife. These are the three fundamentals to make the foundation of your belief. And the particulars in there, that's dhanni and furu', things like that. But do deists believe in an afterlife? If they do, and there's a thawab iqab, then they're minimally past the test. Can you see, as it were? The mechanics of it is, I guess, people can differ. So the question is, do Muslim deists believe in the akhirah?
We'll have to ask one.
That's right. That's what I'm saying. So you know, if they do, then they pass Ghazali's three foundations. That's it. Then you are minimally, you have iman, and under the Sharia, you're a believer in that sense. But or you have salvation possibly for you. But I don't know. You're right. We'll have to ask if anyone knows a Muslim deist. I've got a couple, but they won't come on. They won't come on here and reveal their names.
We could keep them anonymous, Doc.
Yeah, that's true. I don't mind. But I'll ask that person if they believe in akhirah, iqab and thawab. If they don't, then we're in a bit of trouble.
Yeah, but I was thinking more along the lines of the Ash'ari saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates the effect every time.
Yeah,
every time. For example, on every occasion.
Are you saying is tawalludat? If you're saying is the Ash'ari account of tawalludat, is that if someone denies that, are they kafir?
No,
I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah. Allahu a'lam. Same with kasb and all the other areas. These are, I mean, that's a kasb is an account of ikhtiyar, and things like that. So yeah, okay, maybe we should try. There's an article that's done on deism. It's written on deism in Islam. I'll try and dig it out and I'll send it a couple of years back. Yeah. Shukran on way. It's always a pleasure to hear your voice. What I was going to say was, okay, so unless there's any questions, we'll wrap it up there.
So Doc, next week.
Next week's going to get a bit heavy.
Is it good? I think it sounds like we're going to do a big Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah focus, because you said you're going to mention his.
Oh, and then I'll do that then. Okay, so what I'll do.
And his on the Qanūn al-Kulli, because he's got massive critique of it. That could be something we can link in there as well.
Okay, so we're going to go for two heavyweights then next week. Then we go for Shaykh al-Islam's view, for how I understand it to be the eternity of the world, and that argument, and Ghazali's hermeneutics, Hujjat al-Islam's hermeneutics, and how that relates to then theology.
And maybe even Taymiyyah's critique.
Oh, we're going to have to. Yeah, we're going to have to. Yeah. It's not a universal, even though it's called a Qanūn al-Kulli, the universal canon. It's not universally accepted.
No, of course it's not. Yeah.
All right. If there's no other questions, we can, we'll keep it until our next session, inshallah. We'll carry on, like I said, unless otherwise. I know it's a blessed month, and I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept your actions and my actions. Please remember us in your du'as in this blessed month, and of course the Muslim ummah and everyone, whether the mazloom or those who are mubtala. We're nearly there. We're at the doorstep. We hope Allah blesses us to enter into this blessed month. So yeah, until our next session then, I hope to see you all بإذن الله تعالى next week. Wassalamu alaikum.